I know. Hello,
Okay.
welcome Sean for joining me today for another edition of Insights into College Admissions. Today I'm doing something different that I've never done before. So you are the first person that I'm talking to about testing. I do understand testing is sometimes we don't talk too much about it because of all the things that have happened with testing recently, with a lot of schools going test optional or test blind. But we do know that testing still plays a key role in students being admitted into university. So before we get into the big of it, why don't you tell us a little bit, Sean, the audience, about yourself and how you got started into doing what you're doing. In fact, I need to say that you are the founder of Onsen Education.
Mhm.
Introduce
Excellent.
yourself.
Yeah. Thanks so much, John, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I love talking about testing. I'm kind of a nerd about like SAT and ACT, so I'm happy to be here. I've been teaching these tests for close to 15 years, far too long, SAT and ACT. And I started Onsen Education 6 years ago, 2017, in New York City, based in New York City. Originally, we worked with like students from New York and LA, domestic students, and then we started working with students from Italy and other European countries, and now we're kind of like all over the map. We work with students in over 20 countries. We're about half domestic US students and half international. We have a team of 25 tutors, 18 of them are SAT and ACT, and 7 of them are grad school tests, doing the GMAT, GRE, LSAT, MCAT. So we do all of both undergrad and grad testing for US universities. Additionally, a lot of our international students use the SAT or ACT for applying to European universities like Bocconi in Milan, where we were just at last month,
Yes.
and IE Madrid and Asade and other schools, right? And as we learned too, and I believe Francis's presentation on Oxbridge admissions, having a test score, of course, is not required or asked for by UK universities, but it can be helpful if you have a competitive one to submit it. So Jean, to your point earlier, about like the shifting landscape of test optional, and yeah, that's happened. Due to the pandemic, test optional was around, of course, before with some schools, but due to the pandemic and students not being able to take, in-person testing, obviously, and all the test centers getting canceled, over 2,000 universities in the U.S. went test optional. Which I think is a great thing. There's definitely I think a lot of students that potentially don't, the testing doesn't, they don't, I don't believe students don't test well, but there are students that, the testing is just not, it takes away from the bigger picture of their candidacy, right? And that's a great thing that they can apply without the tests. But if you can get a competitive score on the test, then I think it's always worth submitting, except for those need blind schools or test blind schools rather, like the UCs that won't even look at it, and so that's where we come in. I think it's always good to begin with a diagnostic. SAT or ACT are the two, for some of the international students that might be watching this that aren't as familiar with the tests, the SAT and ACT are the two options for US admissions in the European universities that we mentioned, and they're looked on with equal light, right? So there's no preference for SAT or ACT. They're looked at equally. And so we always recommend that students begin this process by taking a diagnostic test in both to see which is a better fit for that individual student. And to see if testing is even a desirable use of a student's time, or if they should focus more on the most important part of their application, which is their grades, right, and their GPA. So sorry, that's a little overview, Sean, but happy to
No,
dig in.
thanks. That is great. That is great. So, I mean, from what you are saying, I can add to that that there are some students, they might be good students in terms of academics, yet when they are seated to take a standardized test, they are traumatized, and therefore you can see there is a drop on their grades or on the testing that they take. So I do understand the importance of the diagnostics to help them understand if it's something even valuable for them to go on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, ideally, the right timeline to begin this process of taking the diagnostics is the summer or the spring of sophomore year, right? Would be, or whatever the equivalent is in whatever international school system you're in, right? The second year of high school, or when you have 2 years left to graduate. So I think that's a great time to take these diagnostics, the spring or the summer after sophomore year. Then you have
most likely during junior year.
Right. And a lot of students will take it, fall of junior year, will take the diagnostics and then kind of target a test date for March or May of their junior year as their first test date.
Okay.
Generally, students will take the SAT or ACT 2 to 3 official times before they reach their target score. And sometimes they get their target score the first time and they're like, well, I can push this even further and expand my university options by taking it again and getting a higher score. But yeah, that's a general sense of the timeline, is to take these diagnostics, towards the end of your sophomore year. That allows you about a year and a half to really prepare as much as you can for getting the highest score possible.
So in terms of the work that you do, how do you help the students shape their understanding of the test and to score their best? Because actually, we mentioned the stress level that some students go through. So let's say, for instance, a student that goes through this type of process, how does your support help them to calm themselves down and then to do their best and to score the top score possible when they take the test?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think there are several components to tutoring, right? There's the content that we want to tell them, the math concepts, the English grammar rules, right? That has to be firm, and we want to teach that, of course. And the way we do that is looking at the diagnostic results, and we do it from an error analysis approach. So we're always looking at what is the student missing? What are the precise questions they miss? And let's build a program around that. Let's look at, they're missing questions on Pythagoras, right? Like, so we have to dive into that geometry concept. They're missing questions on the English section about semicolons or punctuation. So we have to really dive into that content. So that's one component, right? The content. And we use the diagnostics and the homework all through error analysis to see what's going on there. And then there's strategy, right? So strategy are the ways, like, how do we shave some time off certain questions? How can we use the answer choices to strategically help us answer the question rather than only be focusing on the text itself? How do we approach the ACT science section? Because that's a section that students haven't seen anything like that in school, and they're always kind of terrified of at first. And there are specific strategies to approach that. And also in terms of how you order questions, right? Maybe you do 5 before 3 because of the way that the question is shaped or how many words the question has. So that's the second component, strategy. And then, Jean, I really like what you emphasized, how students can get traumatized by the test taking experience, the pressure, the anxiety around test taking. I think a lot of tutoring companies focus on those first 2 components. But like, what I think makes us unique, and I'll you know, I'll toot my own horn a little bit here, is that we really focus on the headspace of a student, making them feel comfortable and in control on the test in the official testing environment. And how we do that is we offer test day coaching to all of our students, which really are practical applications of mindfulness to help students throughout the whole process of tutoring getting used to sitting down at their lesson mindfully with intentions, objectives. They want to complete the lesson, practical applications of how to center themselves, how to do breathing exercises when they get nervous in the middle of a practice test or an official test. We work on all of that with students as well. So I think those are the three components, right? We have content, strategy, and then test day coaching, making students feel comfortable, in command, and addressing all of those natural anxieties, which most students face.
So also, I do understand, well, before we talked about test optional and test blind, but for a lot of universities, it's also important to have test scores when they actually give some sort of even merit scholarship to students, right? Because a lot of schools, although they say, okay, we are test blind or whatever, test optional, but a student cannot get the highest packaging possible when they get their package aid to reflect, even if they have good grades. So that means this is still important for a lot of institutions, although they might be test blind or test optional.
100%, yes. And we do have students that come to us with that kind of goal to get more financial aid, or scholarships, right, based on their scores. We also work with athletes that have to hit a minimum score to get accepted to university, and that also happens. So yeah, there are kind of a variety of different reasons why students might want to take testing, even when the landscape has shifted to mostly test optional schools.
Great. So then I guess we're gonna hit the last point, because I know, yeah, recently we've shifted into something very interesting that you discussed when we were in Milan about taking the exam online now. So tell us a little bit, because I know you've been spending a lot of time learning about this and how to support your students. Has the landscape has shifted for a lot of students in terms of now they have to take the test online instead of being in a testing facility. So is it still possible then that a student can do both, if so choose?
Is it still possible for them to do like the paper-based test or
paper-based test instead of the online test? Because for some students, they might feel it's perhaps easier to do the base test, but we know that with the paper you have to like put dots and stuff. So I mean, for working, because we're working with Gen Z, for them the computer is always the best thing. But we know there's some students that still may feel stressed with the process and rather do it. Or for students with a certain IEP who may not have been so comfortable with the computer. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the digital SAT launched in March of this year for international students, right? And even though it's digital and it's adaptive, right? Students still take it at the test facility, right? They take their computer, they take their device. They don't take it at home. Internationally, the ACT has been digital since 2018. So they still go to the computer and they do it. So internationally, the options are all digital now. There's no paper-based test unless a student has extra time accommodations, right? Based on a learning difference, right? Maybe they have ADHD and they qualify for extra time. If they have extra time, they can take a paper-based version of the SAT or a paper-based version of the ACT. Now, for US domestic students in the US, it's a little different, right? There's still a paper-based SAT until March 2024.
2024,
And
yeah.
so, students without extra time accommodations are still taking the paper-based test. The ACT is also still paper-based in the US. It's not digital. So in the US, until 2024, there's no digital option, right? US students and international students will be taking the PSAT in October digitally, right? Those international students that take it at their school. And that'll be like US students' first exposure to this digital version.
So then tell me, what's the how do students feel about that? Because this is going to be a game changer for especially domestic students in the US.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited about the new test, the digital SAT. It's an hour shorter than the paper-based version. It's adaptive, which means that you start off taking one section that is a mix of beginner, intermediate, and difficult questions, and then depending on how you perform, you move up to a harder level difficulty or an easier level difficulty for the next section, and that's great. I think that is it's a way of more accurately and efficiently telling where locating a student's score. And I think that's going to be great for students. They're going to especially love that it's only 2 hours instead of like 3.5, which would be the biggest change. The other thing is that there's going to be faster score release, so in theory, that hasn't happened yet. With the first March international test, it still took 2 weeks to get the results back. But in theory, we should see those results back in 2 to 3 days, which would be great for students.
And technically, once they get used to the system, I guess this is the pilot going on at this time with the international student. Once they fix all the kinks in the system, so it should be able to for students domestically to get their results a little bit faster.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
In March, I think like the College Board is kind of testing out the new digital SAT with the international students and getting ready for it for US students next March. Yeah.
Or roll out for the US students so that they can experience the same thing the other students are experiencing.
Exactly. And I think that's a big win for students. I'm excited about this test. I think students will, and our students that have already worked on it, international students have reported back that they like it way more than the old test. And so, yeah, I think it's a good thing overall.
That's great. Sean, I know you're busy, but I really appreciate your insight today regarding the testing and how that impacts students internationally and domestically. So if you're a student right now who are interested in taking the test, I'm sure Sean has given you a lot of, if you're an international student, what to expect. And for those students domestically in the US, get ready, it's coming too, so that you can enjoy getting the test, perhaps maximize your scores too, right? Since it's so interactive for students.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the next game changer for students in terms of the testing. Sean, yep. We need to get in touch again, talk a little bit more about the next changes as they come domestically in the US. Until then, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks so much for having me, Jean. It's a pleasure, and always happy to dive further into the new SAT and the changes for domestic and international students whenever you'd like.
Great.